Someone pushed back on you recently. You gave them advice, solid advice, the kind that was clearly right, and they looked you in the eye and did the exact opposite. I know that feeling. That quiet frustration, that moment where you think, what is wrong with people? Nothing. Nothing is wrong with them at all. And what I'm about to tell you, it's not what you expect. 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli sat in exile in a small farmhouse outside Florence, stripped of power, watching from the outside, and with nothing left to lose, he started writing down the truest things he'd ever learned about how human beings actually work. Not how we wish they worked, how they actually work. One of the things he noticed, and this is the part they never taught you, is that people don't move toward what they're told to want. They move toward what feels like their own idea. Today, I'm giving you what Machiavelli gave to princes, what psychologists discovered centuries later and called by a different name, what every great negotiator, every brilliant parent, every effective leader has understood quietly for themselves. First, let me show you the mechanism, because once you see how it works, you'll recognize it everywhere. Principle 1. The harder you push, the harder they push back. There's a concept in psychology called reactance. Jack Brem named it in 1966, but Machiavelli described it in 1513. The idea is this. The moment a person feels their freedom of choice being threatened, the moment they sense someone steering them, something in the human brain fires like an alarm, and it doesn't matter if the advice is good. It doesn't matter if you're right. The moment they feel managed, they resist. Think about it this way. You tell your teenager to clean their room. What happens? Nothing. You tell them again. Still nothing. You escalate, and somehow the room gets messier. That's not stubbornness. That's biology. That's a survival instinct wearing the costume of bad behavior. Machiavelli saw this play out in courts, in armies, in republics. In the Discourses on Livy, he wrote that men will endure almost anything, poverty, loss, even grief, before they'll endure the feeling of being compelled. Compulsion, he argued, is the thing that turns a loyal subject into an enemy overnight. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, because if reactance is real, and the research is overwhelming that it is, then every time you've tried to convince someone through logic and pressure and repetition, you may have been making it worse. You haven't been pushing them toward the right choice, you've been pushing them toward resistance. And that's only principle 1. Principle 2. Scarcity doesn't just sell products, it changes minds. Robert Cialdini spent years documenting this, but Tacitus saw it first, writing about how Roman emperors manipulated the Senate not by commanding them, but by withdrawing, by making certain information rare, by creating the impression that access was limited. When something feels freely available, we discount it. When it feels like it could be taken away, we suddenly want it. Think about the parent who says, "Fine, don't eat your vegetables. I'm not going to fight you on this." And the child, confused by the sudden lack of resistance, takes a bite, not because the vegetables changed, because the pressure disappeared. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "A wise prince creates the conditions for others to choose what the prince already wants, not through force, through framing." Say this with me. My influence grows when I stop forcing it. Good. Hold that. Because here's where it gets worse. Everything you've been told about persuasion is backwards. You've been taught that the strongest argument wins, that clear logic changes minds, that if you just explain your position well enough, people will come around. You've been taught that persistence shows you care. Thomas Hobbes, who read Machiavelli carefully, who built an entire philosophy of human nature on the idea that people are driven by self-preservation above all else, Hobbes understood something that modern persuasion culture has completely forgotten. People do not make decisions because of evidence. They make decisions because of identity. Principle 3. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. When you argue with someone using facts and logic, here's what actually happens inside their brain. They're not evaluating your evidence. They're asking, does agreeing with this person make me more or less like who I think I am? This is what Jonathan Haidt's research confirmed decades after Hobbes predicted it. The rational mind is not the decision maker, it's the press secretary. It comes up with reasons after the emotional decision is already made. So every time you've made an airtight logical case, you may have been talking to the wrong part of the brain entirely. Principle 4. The person who appears not to want something usually gets it. This is the deepest cut. Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's model for ruthless effectiveness, the man he held up in The Prince as someone who did almost everything right, Borgia never openly wanted power. He maneuvered. He appeared disinterested. He let others believe the initiative was theirs, and then, when the moment came, the power was already his. Machiavelli watched him and wrote, "The prince who seems to ask for nothing is often the one who ends up with everything." Strategic self-anti-conformity, modern psychologists call it, the deliberate appearance of resistance to your own goal. Not deception, exactly, but the understanding that wanting something openly triggers the other person's reactance. So you position yourself as indifferent, maybe even opposed, and you let their own psychology do the work. Stop. Everything I just said? That's only half true. Because this isn't just a manipulation toolkit. This is also a mirror. And if you've been on the receiving end of this, and you have been, we all have, then understanding it is how you protect yourself. Repeat after me. I see the game now, and seeing it sets me free. Good, because there's one thing Montesquieu understood that changes everything, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Charles Louis de Secondat, Montesquieu, spent his life thinking about how free people are actually governed, not by tyrants who command, by systems that create the right conditions for people to choose wisely on their own. His great insight in the spirit of the laws wasn't just about government, it was about human nature. He argued that the most durable influence isn't force, it's architecture. Design the environment correctly, and people choose what you hoped they'd choose without ever feeling coerced. That is reverse psychology at its philosophical root. Principle 5. Frame the choice, not the answer. When you want someone to move, don't tell them where to go. Give them two options, both of which lead roughly where you need them to go, and let them feel the authorship of their own decision. This is what skilled negotiators do, what great therapists do, what Machiavelli called giving your adversary a golden bridge, a path toward capitulation that lets them feel like they won. Max Weber, writing in the early 20th century, described 3 types of legitimate authority: traditional, charismatic, and rational legal. But the thread running through all 3, the thing that makes authority stick, is that the people subject to it believe they chose it voluntarily. Consent, manufactured or genuine, is what separates stable power from brittle power. Principle 6. Withdrawal is a move. Silence is a signal. When you stop arguing, something strange happens. The other person suddenly fills the silence with their own doubts, their own second-guessing. You weren't the obstacle. You were the thing their resistance was pushing against. Remove the obstacle, and they have nothing left to push against but themselves. Rousseau called it something close to this in The Social Contract. The general will doesn't emerge from commands. It emerges when the conditions are right for people to recognize what they already wanted. You can't force the general will. You can only create the space for it to surface. Psychologically, this is called the ironic process theory. Tell someone not to think about something, and they can't stop thinking about it. Tell them they can't have something, and suddenly it's all they want. But go quiet? Remove the prohibition? The craving often dissolves on its own. Principle 7. Use it ethically or lose everything. Here's where I'll be completely honest with you. Every tool described in this conversation can be used with integrity or without it. Machiavelli himself made the distinction, in The Discourses, not The Prince, between the virtuous leader who uses skill to serve the republic and the merely cunning one who uses it only for himself. The first builds something lasting. The second eventually gets destroyed by the very mechanisms he exploited. Francesco Guicciardini, Machiavelli's sharpest contemporary critic, warned that particulare, private advantage, corrupts everything it touches. The man who uses reverse psychology to manipulate people toward outcomes that only serve him will, in time, be seen through. And then he won't just lose the argument, he'll lose the relationship, the trust, the influence. But the person who understands human reactance, who creates space instead of applying pressure, who frames choices instead of issuing commands, who withdraws when their presence is becoming counterproductive, that person becomes genuinely powerful, because they're working with human nature instead of against it. You came to this conversation feeling that quiet frustration, that sense that no matter how right you are, the people around you won't move. Now you understand why. And more than that, you understand what actually works. Machiavelli saw the game. Hobbes explained why it never changes. Montesquieu showed us how to build something better. And now you understand all three. If this shifted something in you, if you felt that click of recognition somewhere in the middle of this isn't meant to stay with just you. Share it with someone who's been beating their head against a wall trying to get through to someone they care about. Like it if it landed. Subscribe because there's more you need to know. And remember this. The most powerful person in any room isn't the one pushing hardest. It's the one who stopped pushing entirely and let the room come to them. That's what they never taught you.